Welcome back to part 5. Let's talk about the change process. There is actually a process of changing, and the first step is to unfreeze. People that have been doing things for a while have developed habits. Good habits, bad habits, but they are habits. The first thing we need to do is break those habits. We need to unfreeze. We need to provide information on why we're doing this. And that is the most important thing. If you can't convince the person why, you're not going to convince them. You can tell them what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it. But if you don't tell them why to do it, if they don't believe the why, you're not going to get anything out of them. So you need to explain why the change is needed. Needed, not wanted. Make sure you involve everybody in the planning process. Don't just have the manager come down and say, we're doing this. Bring everybody on board. Have everybody get together, or at least a representative sample of everybody. Maybe a couple nurses from each shift, and maybe a couple CNAs and the health eating coordinator. And get everybody involved in unfreezing. The more people get unfreezing, the easier it is to explain the why. Acknowledge that change is hard. It's challenging. It's going to make people slower. It's going to make people make mistakes. It's going to make people feel very uncomfortable. And you're going to feel less competent when you're doing something new. Acknowledge that up front and say, it's okay. It's okay. Whenever you do something new, think of the first time you picked up an IV needle and you were going to put it in somebody's arm. Maybe you haven't done that yet. But when you do, think about that first time. You've never done it before in a real person. You're new. There are no habits yet. In 5 years, you won't even think twice about it because you have that expertise. Now, we want to make sure we unfreeze only after another process that was in the process of being changed has been completed. For example, if a hospital says we're going to put in a new computer system and a new PICS system, and we're going to change everybody's shifts all at the same time, that'd be a problem. One change at a time. Focus on one change and then move on. So after we unfreeze, we're going to actually make the change. And we're going to look at how we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to be very active in helping people. We're going to have a little bit of hand-holding at first. We're going to modify the plans as needed because no plan ever goes perfectly according to plan. Look at mistakes, look at problems, and see, can we incorporate modifications to make it easier for everybody? And know that changing group behavior can be a long and difficult process. It causes high energy usage, personal energy, a perception of inconsistency, stress, increased conflict. So as leaders, you have to be aware of that and understand that is part of the change process. It's not necessarily acceptable, but it's part of the process, and so you have to adapt to that. And then once the change has been put into place, we need to refreeze. Recognize the success. Reward people for their hard work. We're not going to be doing any hand-holding anymore. We're going to step back and we're going to let the people run on their own. We're going to incorporate the change into the structure of the facility. So we're going to have medical records. We're going to update the policy and procedure manual. We're going to write the job description and performance evaluation forms. We're going to create quality program indicators. Those are all structural pieces that we're going to look at. What about errors? Have you made a med error or any kind of error yet? If you haven't, you will. Everybody makes an error. If you know somebody who says they've never made an error, they probably aren't aware of all the errors that they've made. An error is a failure of a planned action to be completed as intended, or the use of a wrong plan to achieve an outcome. Now there are different types of errors. Diagnostic treatment and preventative errors are the biggest types. But then there's iatrogenic injury, there's error of commission or omission, error of planning, adverse and active errors, latent errors. So an error that happened but didn't cause harm. Let's say you put an IV in a person's arm and the IV, their vein blows. That's actually an error, but it didn't cause any harm. What can we learn from it? Well, we learn maybe different IV insertion techniques. A near miss is an error that didn't quite happen, but almost happened. And then there are sentinel events, and we'll talk a little bit more about those right now. A sentinel event, these are major. These are the big ones. Unexpected occurrence, usually involving a death or loss of limb or function. A fall that results in brain damage would be a sentinel event. This sounds a warning of a need for immediate investigation and response. The missed IV, that's just an error. That's not a big deal. We're not going to turn the hospital upside down. But if a person falls, strikes their head, and it becomes paralyzed, believe me, that happens. Life will never be the same in that hospital. Top 3 sentinel events: wrong site surgery, which is why when you have a surgery on, say, a knee or an ankle or an arm, almost always your surgeon will have you sign that line saying use this arm, or write not this on the wrong side. I had bilateral knees, so I was pretty safe unless they did my hips, but they only did my knees. Suicide is a sentinel event, and operative and postoperative complications, leaving instruments and items in the person, or postoperative infections. Those are the top 3 sentinel events. And that's the end of part 5.